Welcome to Small Arms Solutions. Today we're talking about a very, very interesting topic I think you're going to find very interesting as well. The XM9 program and the two finalists. Now, one of the things that's very interesting we hear people talk about is the lowest bidder thing. Oh, we got the M9 because of the lowest bidder. We're going to get into that. We're going to find out how this program actually worked out and how the numbers worked out as well as how the program was done. The XM9 program was done properly. Unlike the XM17 program, which is a complete failure, they violated every rule that they had for as far as testing protocols and, everything from testing, procurement, everything. It was completely wrong. This program was done right, where you actually had a requirement, you had submissions, you had a phase 1 testing, you had a down select, then you had the two down selects went through the phase 2 testing. In this case, both of them passed that. And then we had a competitive bidding. So we're going to talk about those numbers. So people will see that they did not get an inferior pistol. Both of these pistols met and exceeded the criteria set up by the XM9 program. Both of these. You have to have competitive bidding to figure out who the winner is going to be because they both can't win. So let's go back in time a little bit to 1978. 1978, there was a House Committee on Appropriations report on the proliferation of handguns and ammo and the use of recommended standardization. The U.S. government had multiple different kinds of guns. They had 45s, 38s. There was just multiple different guns in the inventory, which, as you can imagine, causes a logistical nightmare of trying to maintain them. And also at that time, we had a NATO standardization. Of course, we were the only country in NATO who was still using a 45 and a 38. Everybody else was using 9x19 9mm. So again, as being part of NATO, one of the leading countries in NATO, we needed to comply with the standardization process. Now, the U.S. Air Force, they were done with the 1911, absolutely, and they were looking for something new, and they wanted the Beretta 92S-1. They wanted to adopt it. However, for the U.S. government, the Army is the one who's responsible for the procurement and testing and whatnot of new small arms. Now, there's no formal requirement for a 9mm pistol until June of '81. At that point, Joint Services operational requirement was written and approved for that. It called for 85 distinct characteristics, 72 mandatory and 13 were desirable. There were handguns that were developed. There was one, two, 3, 4. There were 4 handguns that were submitted to this initial program. Smith & Wesson 459. The SACO was an importer who represented SIG, the SIG P226. You had HK with their VP70, which, if you're familiar with that, basically it was a blowback 9mm that had basically the trigger of a Stanley staple gun, and the Beretta 92S1. Now, the 1981 program was open to any domestic or foreign gun makers. The only one that was U.S. for that was the Smith & Wesson. Now, looking at the 1978 requirements versus the 1981 test results, one of the biggest changes was the reference to reliability, including reliability under adverse conditions, different climatic conditions, and overall required service life. Standards were made to make the new weapon superior to that of the 1911. The goal was to significantly outperform. 3 of the 4 pistols tested exceeded the reliability of the 1911. The second area was corrosion resistance over the traditional Parkerized M1911A1. The third area was double action, single action capability. Basically, there was no more requirements for a single action. The single action, overall, was not safe. Carrying cocked and locked, it was not something that was desirable. Having the double action, of course, with your first shot, you have a double strike capability. The ability to carry it loaded with the hammer down, and also the ability to decock without having to ride the hammer forward. So there's safety issues. Other characteristics was 5,000 round minimum service life, capability to withstand extended use in the field, and maintain limited to user level compliance with military health, safety, and human engineering standards. So the 1981 test trials, the Beretta, we're going to start looking at the actual passes and failures. The Beretta passed service life, it failed reliability, passed wet mud, failed dry, failed saltwater corrosion, and passed firing pin energy. The HK VP70s, it passed service life, failed reliability, passed wet mud test, passed dry, passed water corrosion, passed firing pin energy. The SACO, or the SIG P226, passed service life, failed reliability, failed wet mud, failed dry, passed saltwater corrosion, passed firing pin energy. Smith & Wesson, Passed service life, failed reliability, failed wet mud, failed dry test, passed saltwater, failed firing pin energy. All pistols exceeded the M1911 service, but the Beretta and the Sacco, or the SIG P226, outperformed all of them. The end results were, of all 4 pistols that were tested, none of them passed the criteria. So basically, they were going to start all over again. So then we come to what we really will refer to now as the XM9 trials. The XM9 trials were in 1984. The requirements were a big modification of the 81. They were significantly raised the bar as well. All tests had requirements for the pistols to meet or exceed. If the pistol did not meet, it failed. In November 1983, the Department of the Army asked weapons manufacturers in a formal request for proposal for a 2-step negotiated procurement restricted only to those bidders who responded to the RFTS or requests for test samples. Technical proposals were June 1984. Step 2 was a proposal for cost by September 1984. The Army would use a fixed catalog pricing for repair parts and cost evaluation factors, and parts would be ordered with the pistols. 8 companies, including 2 U.S., answered. One of the biggest changes in this test was ammunition. There was a lot of thoughts that the quality of the ammunition had a lot to do with the failures with the original test in 78 and in 1981. So the ammunition that was chosen for 1984 was more of a NATO spec 124 grain projectile. Let's go over what guns were tested. Steyr, GB. Fabrique Nationale brought the BDA, which was their it was a decock double action. Colts SSP. Colts SSP was part 9mm, part 1911. Walther P88, Heckler & Koch. P7 M13, Smith & Wesson 459M. Switzerland, which Sacco P226, and Beretta 92 SBF. Well, right off the bat, the FN Browning BDA in May 31st, 1984, and the Colt SSP in July 18th, 1984, were voluntarily withdrawn by the manufacturers. Basically, both Colt and FN knew their pistols were not going to hold up, so they voluntarily withdrew them. So now we get into really where this gets interesting, was the service life testing. Now, throughout this testing phases, a lot of it was challenged by manufacturers. They were claiming that Beretta was unfair. We're going to get into that in a little bit, but we're going to talk about how these guns actually held up. First part, service life testing. The Smith & Wesson 459 failed due to a cracked frame, visible to the naked eye before the minimum service life requirement of 5,000 rounds. Failed between 4,500 and 5,000 rounds. Also failed firing pin protrusion test. Smith & Wesson would go ahead and challenge these findings in federal court twice and failed. Smith & Wesson claimed because the pistols completed the trials without a structural failure that they should have been passed, and that was not the case. The requirements were very specific on any kind of cracks or anything, regardless of whether it was a showstopper or not. Any damage would be a disqualifying feature. The SIG P226 had a frame crack at 6,523 rounds. And at 7,000 rounds. However, both of them exceeded the 5,000 rounds, so the SIG passed that. The Beretta had no frame failures of any sort, and 1911 had a frame fail at 3,500 rounds. HK frame did not fail. Reliability testing. Beretta, SIG 226, and Smith & Wesson passed reliability. HK pistol failed 35 points below that of the M1911. That was basically calculated mean rounds between failures. However, the Beretta and the SIG 226 led the highest in means round between failures. Mud test. M1911 control 100%, HK 99%, Smith & Wesson 97%, P226 88%, Beretta 97%. Saltwater corrosion. M1911 99%, HK 86%, Smith & Wesson 97%, SIG P226 and the Beretta 92 FS 100%. Firing pin protrusion. Smith & Wesson was the only one to fail that. September 1984. Walther, HK, and Smith & Wesson were notified they had been disqualified from the program because they did not meet the requirements. In mid-November, only Beretta and SIG completed all testing for both and were both deemed acceptable. The overall score had shown that the P226 was slightly ahead with a score of 853.6 compared to the Beretta with 835.44. Both pistols met and significantly exceeded the requirements by the Army. After pricing, the Beretta score went up to 858 and SIG dropped to 847. Beretta was awarded the contract in January of 1985. The Beretta contract was signed in April '85 due to Smith & Wesson and SACO protesting it. The Beretta contract, there was 315,930 pistols with a total cost of $75 million for over 5 years. So now let's start getting into what these numbers actually were. So, pistols. The final pricing for the pistols for the Beretta was $178.50 per pistol. SIG, $176.33. So the Beretta was actually $2.17 more expensive than that of the SIG. So the pistols, Beretta was more expensive. This is where the contract was won. Magazines, $9.30 a piece for the Beretta, $11.95 for the SIG. For spare parts, $209.42 for the Beretta, and for the SIG, $221.79. So, Beretta's total cost was $74,762,307. Total for the SACO P226 SIG, $77,816,401. So when the final numbers tallied, the U.S. government had saved by Beretta a total of over $3 million. So again, the Beretta pistol was actually $2.17 more expensive. It was, again, the spare parts packages is which won the contract for Beretta. So 1985, there was an additional 4,100 pistols added to the contract, increasing to 315,930 pistols. So what does this say here? The M9 pistol was actually more expensive, so it's $2.17 more than this one. Again, it was the cost of the magazines and the spare parts packages. Both pistols met and exceeded the requirements. So now it gets difficult with all the challenges. SIG claimed there was a price leak to Beretta. That was a big allegation that came out. Beretta's price dropped 18% up from their best offer, as well as it was handwritten in the amount on the papers. So that was somewhat suspicious to them. Beretta was found to cut the prices as a desire to win. Beretta USA purchased the M9 pistols from Beretta Italy for $178.50, with the hope that in Phase 3, Beretta USA could produce the same pistols at the same cost here in the United States. So we're talking a little bit more about these spare parts, because this was something else that SIG had tried to challenge. Basically, SIG claimed that all spare parts provisioning costs were built by the Army for the purpose of the price evaluations were unfair because they doubled the cost of certain SIG parts, but not Beretta's. SACO litigated this before the U.S. District Court in Maine in a civil case on February 20th, 1986. The court dismissed all the allegations. There were several proposed design modifications for these guns that the Army basically did not pursue. Also, the durability would go from 5,000 rounds up to 6,000 rounds as this contract would move forward. There were more allegations that came up with these other gun manufacturers against Beretta, claiming things such as international sales agreements, economic impact on the U.S. industry. There was a perception of bias towards Beretta, alleged by SACO for price leaks, alleged covert testing, as well as allegations the U.S. made Italian secret agreements, which were found to be ludicrous. Limited impacts on the U.S. gun industry. The U.S. should be using U.S.-made firearms. Well, I mentioned that a little bit earlier in this video. The fact that of the two finalist guns, not one of them was an American-made gun. None of the finalists were even American-made guns. So for them to claim that U.S. should be using a U.S. gun, we want our troops to have the best guns that are available. Unfortunately, we're not making them here in the U.S. There are also contract provisions to lessen the impact, as well as a comparison of Beretta versus American firms winning contracts to influence a private sector and foreign demand for Italian trade. All these independent issues are proven to be false, viable, and were proven to be false. And again, I'm going to be the first one to say that I think that we should be using American-made guns, but only if those American-made guns are up to par. We don't lower. I would not want to lower our criteria to make it U.S. Now, let's talk about a little bit more about this contract. Beretta was an Italian gun, obviously, out of Gardona Veltrampia in Italy. Part of this contract was these guns had to be made in the U.S. So after the contract was won, it was broken up into three phases. The first phase, the guns can be brought in from Italy. Second phase, half the guns had to be made in the U.S. The third phase was all parts and all guns had to be made here in the U.S. So basically, if you look at the Beretta factory in Accokeek, Maryland at that time, the sole purpose of that was being built was for the M9 contract to build the guns within the U.S. borders, and which they did. Now, throughout the time period, there have been some issues that have come up. Again, people wanted to say that this was the SIG was the better pistol, and the Beretta was just the lowest bidder. From what you just heard from the actual test results, that is the farthest from the truth. Both of these pistols performed equally, and both of them exceeded the criteria. In fact, if you want to talk about lowest bidder, again, the SIG was cheaper than the Beretta pistol. We're just looking at the spare parts packages. So this was challenged again by some U.S. manufacturers to say that this was unfair. Smith & Wesson and Ruger, I think, were two of the main ones. So they wanted a retrial. Now, so the U.S. government said, we'll do it. Because, again, these American companies were saying that the guns that were used in the trials were guns that were hand-selected by Beretta. They didn't represent the actual guns that were provided to the U.S. government. So in the second trial, these guns were taken out of U.S. government inventory. They were not special pistols. They were just taken out of the inventory. Come to find that the two of the companies that were responsible to get these retrials didn't even show up. So the trials were done all over again. The same results came up. The final two being the SIG and the Beretta, and Beretta again. They won for as far as the pricing. So we're going to move a little bit more forward now into the use of the SEALs with the M9s. One of the SEAL teams was using M9 pistols and had a couple unfortunate incidents where they had slides that cracked and they had come off and they had hit the SEAL in the face. So there was a big thing that went down where they were claiming that there was a deficiency in the guns. There was a product deficiency report that came out. And during the process of the investigation of finding out why these guns failed, Beretta had to have their slides changed every 1,000 rounds, and they were going through all this. Well, Beretta received the guns back and went through all the metallurgy, and everything was normal. Now, Beretta has never experienced slide failures, and these guns have been used all over the world. This was the first time it was with this Navy SEAL unit. So they were able to take a look at the ammunition and found out that the ammunition that they were using was not NATO spec ammunition. It in fact was plus P plus ammunition. So basically you're firing proof cartridges. And eventually it caused these weapons to fail. In this case was the slide. So not waiting for the results to come out of what the failures were, the Navy SEALs switched over to the P226, saying this was a better gun. Well, what most people don't realize is what broke the slides on here cracked the frames on the SIGs. So it was an ammunition-related issue, but the SEALs, again, they were soured. They didn't care, the fact that there was what the reasoning was. There was nothing wrong with the Beretta pistol. They chose to go with the SIG P226, which eventually would turn into the Mark 25 pistol. So now there was a pretty big hoopla in between the U.S. government and Beretta now, because Beretta not only took a significant hit in many ways. For instance, Beretta's factory was shut down for quite a bit of time while this was all going on with guns not being shipped. Beretta suffered a really big marketing nightmare with people claiming that these guns would fail. They're going to come back and the slides are going to hit you in the face, that the guns are pieces of garbage. When the reality was the Beretta pistol survived the same test results as the SIG did, but again, it was an ammunition-related issue. So because this ammunition was out, Beretta had developed this slide capturing device, which basically they enlarged the hammer pin and cut a notch in the bottom of the slide. So if it was to fail, the rear of the slide could not exit off of the rear of the frame. Because again, that ammunition was out there and it was in use. The U.S. government had to pay for that, and the U.S. government also paid to retrofit all of the M9 pistols with the new slide capture device, which those of you who know the difference between the 92F and the 92FS, S is safety. That's the additional safety that was done, so the slide capture device. Beretta took the U.S. government to court, and Beretta won the lawsuit for defamation. The money that was cost for them to be shut down, because it was significant for them to be shut down during all this. To get the pistols back into service, to get the restrictions lifted off from the 1,000 rounds with the use of proper ammunition. And the M9 would go on to serve since 1985 until only a couple of years ago, until it was replaced by the M17 pistol. So, looking at the two pistols, we talked about characteristics of the different ones. Now, the Beretta had a ambidextrous manual safety, as we see on the top here. The SIG only had a decock. There was no requirement set forth for a manual safety for the XM9 program. This was just two different ways that it was answered. One was a manual safety with a decock. The other one was a decock only. So this is very similar to what people talk about with the XM17 program was, Glock lost because it wasn't modular because of the chassis. No, that's not true at all. Both pistols met the requirement. There was no requirement for a chassis. That had nothing to do with it at all. The modularity and the ambidextrous requirements were done by them both. That's how these contracts work. So for as far as service life, the issues that will come up with the Beretta were ones that we expect will come up with most U.S. service weapons. Lack of maintenance, not changing out recoil springs, not looking at slides to know when they're having cracks in them. When you look at a pistol for commercial use, you go out and you shoot your Beretta 92, a couple hundred rounds a year, no problems. Guns work perfectly. Military pistols, you can have pistols in training units which see tens of thousands of rounds a month. And they're not keeping round counts on these. So you have guns that can see 20, 30, 40,000 rounds. And Beretta's mean round between failure is legendary. There's actually to date, I don't think there's anybody who's matched the M9's mean rounds between failures. Guns get worn out and they break. That's what happens when you don't maintain things. And of course, when they do break, you as an end user or a soldier thinks these things are garbage. Well, that's sort of like having a car and taking it and not changing the oil and freaking out when the car engine seizes. It's the same thing. If you don't maintain any kind of a machine, whether it's a gun or a car or whatever, you're going to have problems with them. And this has been what's happened with the M9 over the last several years. It served admirably since its inception. The issue with the Navy SEALs, the Navy SEALs were the only ones that had seen it, and that was because of using the wrong ammunition. Has it been seen later? Yeah, because again, you have pistols that have been well outside of their service life. SIGs, I've done durability testing on both of these pistols in my past. I did a 20,500 round endurance test on an M9, and I've done several 12 to 15,000 round endurance tests on SIGs. And I can certainly come to tell you that the SIG will experience trigger bar failures. The earlier SIGs would have issues with the pins that held in the breech block into the slide. Those would break. And I had seen cracked frames on SIGs in as low as 12 to 15,000 rounds. The Beretta, it was just over 19,000 rounds where I had a locking block failure. I knew probably 6,000 rounds prior that was going to happen because, again, once you start seeing the pitting on that locking block, it's about ready to fail, but it was a durability test. So for as far as durability, reliability, these pistols are very, very comparable. The SEALs went with this one because they got a bad taste in their mouth because of this one, even though that was their fault due to the ammunition. You still would see other parts of SOCOM that would use the M9. So the last thing I think I want to talk about is a little bit of the XM17 program, because the way the XM17 program was introduced to Congress, it was supposed to have a pistol that had increased capabilities over this, which also means increased capabilities over ammunition. So it was sold to the U.S. government based on getting a new cartridge that was more superior to that of the 9x19. They didn't do that. Basically, all they did was replace it with another 9mm pistol. And you look at the cost that was involved in doing that. You look at the problems that it's been having. One of my videos that I had done was a comparison between the M9 and the M17. And basically, I don't think the military got a gun nearly as good because first off, the SIG P320 doesn't have any kind of reliability testing. They bought it without even testing the thing. And this pistol has been legendary in its performance in combat. The XM17, since it was adopted, they've had all kinds of failures with the safety, the drop safety. They had problems with the feeding ball ammunition. Overall, if they were staying with a 9mm pistol, they should have stayed with the Beretta, gone with the M9A3 or the A4, and gone with the upgrade program that Beretta had offered. Because most of the parts would have still been interchangeable. Manual of arms wouldn't have changed. And again, if you're staying with the 9mm pistol, you've already got one that works. Buy new pistols and upgrade your fleet. It would have been a hell of a lot cheaper than going to a new program, especially going to a new program where you adopt it before you test it, you start testing it, you see major problems. And now we're seeing reports coming from the Army where the guns are being dropped, and they're or they're going off by themselves in holsters. The Army just released a whole bunch of information on that, with several instances of unintentional discharge where guys have had these things, MPs or people who've had them on their sides have just gone off. This shit didn't happen with the M9. The M9 never did anything like that. So, did we get a better gun with the M17 than the M9? I don't think so at all. We were far better off staying with the M9 and going with an upgrade to the M9. But the reason why I wanted to make this video was because this has been an ongoing thing. There's been no two pistols there have been more adversaries in history than these two. It could due to the XM9 trials, due to the misinformation out there that the Army just got the low bidder garbage was not the case. And I also wanted to do this video to talk about the proper way that you do weapons trials. The XM9 program was done ideally. It was done perfectly. You had your phase 1 with everybody who competed. You had your finalists that met that initial requirement, and then you went through the phase 2. You went through all that testing, and you come down to 2 winners, 2 pistols that met all of the criteria. And again, the XM9 criteria. Sometimes 2 to 3 times these pistols had outperformed what its minimum requirement was. So then we have 2 winners that are equal. We have to go through the competitive bidding process, and that's how it worked. And that's how we had to have a winner. And somebody had to come in less in some areas. So this was not the cheapest weapon that was out there that didn't work, that was adopted by the U.S. government. No, these were the top pistols on the face of the earth that the U.S. government competed for its next service pistol. And in the end, the M9 pistol was the one that was chosen. It served admirably. The SIG P226 has gone on to serve within the SOCOM community with SEALs. Has gone on for use with the SIGs as the Mark 25 pistol. It's been used throughout militaries and law enforcement throughout the world. Both of these pistols have been world class. They're still used today. They're still relevant today. Granted, the military is looking at striker fire pistols throughout the world right now, but for as far as viable combat pistols, these are 2 ones that are they're again 1985. They're nearly 40 years old, and guess what? They're still working today. They're still a weapon of choice. They're still in production, and they're still being bought. So even after all this time, the XM9 program, the lineage is still top tier throughout the world. So I sort of hope you guys enjoyed this walk down a technical journey of the XM9 program, how it actually was conducted, what the results were, and then of course talking about that final competitive bidding process and getting an understanding of how military procurement programs work, and to realize that the pistol that was adopted for the U.S. military in 1985 was one of the best pistols on the face of the earth, and it was tested and it proved itself. SIG was too, but you can only have one winner. So I hope you enjoyed this video. If you do, please click like, please subscribe, and even better, share.